Students, you're welcome back. In our last lesson, we created an array that held a reference to game objects. So basically, we could drag a game object into these slots, and this was the code we used to create that array. This time around, let's go ahead and see how we can create a list. A list is similar to an array, but it has much more better status because a list is much more memory efficient, and we can create lists on the fly and add, remove, or delete elements on the fly with lists, so which makes them a better choice to use, especially when it comes to a game engine like Unity. So without further ado, let's go. So to create a list, I'm just going to go ahead and create a new scene or open up a scene I have already. So I'll go to my scenes folder, and I'll just open up this lists scene I have right here. So this is basically an empty scene. To create a scene, you just go to File, New Scene, create the scene, and then you go to Save Scene so you can save your scene. So right now what I want to do is to create a C# script. So if I go back to my game object, to my inspector view right here, and I go to my project view, go to my assets and click on scripts, I'll just right click here and I'll go to create. And let's call this using lists, just like that. And I'll just open up that project, that list right now. So now I have my using list script all opened up. So what I need to do is to just show the syntax of how we can create a list. So right here, I'll just use create a multi-line comment. And within that multi-line comment, I'll just pass in the syntax on how to create a list. So the syntax is as such. So first, we actually have the keyword list. And then we use a pair of angle brackets and pass in a data type, just like that. And this is C# autocorrect, so I'll just get rid of that. And then we'll pass in a variable or any object type. This is going to be equal to a new list, and then we'll pass in the same data type, and we'll actually use a pair of curly parentheses, and then we'll end with our syntax. So that's the syntax for creating a list. We can have a list, we can have a list of strings, right? We can have that for an integer, a float, and also a game object. Alright, so the list is holding a collection of type. So let's just go ahead and create a function to create our list. So I'm just going to call that void. I'll just call that list of games. So now that we have that method, let's just go ahead and expand that a bit. So the first thing I'm going to do is to create a list of strings. So just like we saw in our syntax, let's create a list and let's pass in the data type. So this is going to be a string, and I'll just call that fav_games, because this will represent our favorite games. So it'll be equal to a new list of string type. And there we have it. We have our string. So let's go ahead and add data to our string. So let's just say add data to the list. To the list, not to the string. So I'm simply going to say fav. So that'll be fav_games. Now when you use the dot notation, it's going to show you a list of the methods you could use and a simple description on each of the methods. And basically this tells us we need to add a string item. So basically I'll just say string.add, and I'll pass in the name string value. So we can just say last of us. And let's go ahead and add another game. So favorite games.add. This time around, I'll add, let's say, Resident Evil 7. And let's go ahead and add another list, another game to our list. And let's just call this God of War. And now we can see we have our list. To access the index, we can access the elements of a list using an index. Basically, we could use the square brackets to actually find the index of the object using index of. So if we actually go to fav_games dot and search for index of, this will actually get the index of an item. And let's go ahead and see where that item is. But basically, if we want to get the index of this object, we could just pass in a square bracket and we'll be able to get the index. For instance, for our first game, we could get the index by saying favorite games. And then just like this, with our square bracket, we could just pass in the value of 0. This will get the first element within our list. Just like that. So let's go ahead and keep moving on. So let's get the index of the third element right here using index of. So I'm going to do a debug.log, and within our debug.log, I'm just going to say index of third item is, and then we'll just pass in our 5 games. I'm just going to say 5 games dot index of, and then we'll pass in the name of that string. So we're just going to say God of War, just like that. And since this is a function, let's go ahead and add our second pair of parentheses so we don't actually run into problems. So let's go ahead and just save this, and right here in our start, let's call the list of games. So I'm just going to say list of games method, and let's just call that method and run our method. Let's see our output. So right now I'm back in Unity, and I'm going to drag this and just place it right on our main camera. So now we have that script attached to our main camera. We're not seeing it yet. So let's say using lists, and let's just drag that to our main camera. And let's go ahead and just play our scene and look at our console, because we have a debug.log on our console. So right now it's showing up. Let me just clear this and rerun. So it says the index of the third item is 2. The reason why it's 2 is because it's 0 indexed. Lists are 0 indexed. So the Last of Us is the 0th item. This is the first. This is the second item. So, but if we count 1, 2, 3, that's why I'm saying the third item right here. And we can also use the contains to check if a list contains an item. Let's go ahead and see if it contains a specific data. So let's go ahead and create a comment, and this is checking list for specific data. Let's say you have a list with 1,000 elements. How can you check that list to check for a specific data? Now the contains method, so let's see, favoritegames.contains actually returns a Boolean value. So to actually have access to it, we need to create a Boolean value to store our result. Right? So I'm just going to do the contains. I'm going to check if it contains Resident Evil 7 right here. So to be able to print that out on the screen or use a debug, I'm just going to create a bool. I'm going to call that check game. Just like that. So I'll have this Boolean value that will actually check this to see if that game actually exists. And there should be an equal sign because this is an assignment expression. So right here. So, and then finally, let's just do a debug.log, and within our debug.log method, let's go ahead and pass in this info right here. So let's just say does list contain Resident Evil 7. We'll just ask like a question, and let's concatenate that check. Make sure I close this, and I'll just concatenate the check game like that. So let's go ahead and save this and jump into Unity and check our debug, whether our debug is working fine or whether it'll actually go through that list and check to give us our results. So it said, does this contain Resident Evil 7? So the answer is true right here. It tells us it's true, so we can actually see that. If we actually change this to something else, let's just leave the question mark like so. Right, okay. So let's just go ahead and save this, and let's change this to Crash Bandicoot, and let's just go ahead and save that and get back to Unity and run. So we want to check if our list contains an element that does not exist and see if our boolean will return a true or false value, just to make sure that our code is working super fine. So let's go ahead and run that. And see right here, it said, does list contain Resident Evil? We get that false, so it means our script is working fine and it's actually checking for each item. So if we want to loop and print out every element that is contained within our list, we could use a for loop. So let's just get right here, and I'm just going to say printing elements in the list. So we're going to use a for each. I'm going to call a string game in our favorite games. What we're going to do is to simply print out everything. So what I'm going to do right here is to do a debug.log. And we'll just call this, let's say, game titles. I'll just call it game titles, like there, and then let's concatenate the game in our list, just like that. So let's go ahead and save our script, and let's jump back to Unity and quickly test that debug to see if it's going to give us our results right here. So let's go ahead and run our game. And right now, so we can actually see that we're getting a list of the games. And so we have the index of the third item. So we have Last of Us, Resident Evil 7, and God of War for game titles. So it's printing out these 3 game titles, which is awesome. So let's go ahead and see what we can do more with this list. So with a list, we could add data to it, and we can remove data to a list. To add data to a list, let's just say add in data. Let's go ahead and add a new game. So I'm just going to say fav _games, and we'll use the insert method. Now, each time you put your cursor over any of these methods, it'll actually give you an idea of what it's doing. So right now it's telling us we could insert an index, and then we could pass in the string item an index. An index is an integer. It tells us an int index, so we need to specify this index, and I know that my third element is 2, so the fourth element is going to be 3 right here. So I'm going to add the index at position 3. So for position 3, I'm going to pass in an integer 3, and let's create a new one. Let's see, and you know what, we don't want to just be putting magic values in here. So what I'm going to do is just to create an integer. So int, let's say position is equal to 3, and then let's create a string new game is going to be equal to Spider-Man, just like that. So now we have these green squiggly lines. It means we just have a variable we're not using. C# is trying to tell us to, collect our garbage and let's not use resources, allocate resources we're not using. But we're going to be using it now by passing the position, and also passing the new game we just created right now. And let's just close that. So now that we've created that and passed our new game, we can actually check the position for that new game that we added. Let's do a debug.log, and let's just say new game added to list, and then we'll concatenate that new game. And we'll get the position of that item. So let's just say favorite underscore games, and for the third index, like so, right? So that's the fourth item in the list, by the way. So let's go ahead and run this script, and let's just see how this turns out in Unity. So let's just get back here. And let's go ahead and play our scene. So it says the new game added to list is Spider-Man. So awesome, that's super working. So right now we've been using this list, but we've not actually accessed any of Unity's game object. So let's see how we can use the list with a Unity game object. So right here within our project, let's create a public game object. So right now I'll just say creating a public game object, and it will be the class. So let's say game object, just like that, creating a list of public game object. So first we'll start with the keyword public, and we'll pass in our list, use our angle brackets, and let's pass in our game object. And let's just call that our game underscore list, and this will be equal to a new list, and it's going to be a game object type, and let's close that with our parentheses. So this is our game object type. So now that we have that, what we can do is to create a function. I'll just go ahead and collapse this one and kind of close this, and let's get rid of our update because we're not using it. So right here in between, let's go ahead and create a void. Let's call that our game object list, just like that. So what we're going to do in our list is to create a let's loop through the game object to get the name and the transform of the game object which we created. So to do that, let's just say let's print out the names. So we can just do that by saying, let's use a for loop. So let's say for each, whoops. So for each So we know that our data type is a game object type, so we're going to say game object, and let's just call that G in. So let's check out the name of the list we created. We called our list our game list. So what we want to do right now is to let's go ahead and print out the names. So right here, I'm simply going to just say print our g.name, and also let's print out our game objects transform. So let's simply print. Now the print is going to do the same function as our debug.log. I'm just trying to show you that there's another function you can use in case you don't want to use debug.log. So let's just say game object is at position and then we'll just concatenate the game objects transform. So we'll do a d.transform dot the local position, just like that. And let's go ahead and save our script, and let's just go back to Unity. And let's just clear this. And before we move on, we can actually see we at the right of our inspector, if you make sure you're selecting the main camera, and we can see our game list. If we drop down this list, it's going to ask us for a size. So I just want to create let's say 4 game objects. So it's showing us we have 4 elements of this list. So let's go ahead and just create let's create a cube, let's create a sphere, let's create a light, let's create a point light, and finally let's create a capsule. So we have these 4 game objects. So let's get back here and let's drag our cube into the element 0 position, our sphere into the sphere position, our point light into the point light, and the capsule into the capsule. What I'm going to also do is to change the name. So I'm just going to call this our super cube. I'm going to call this let's just say happy sphere. I'm just leave these 2 as capsules. So with that, let's go ahead and save our project, and let's go ahead and run our scene. So now we have our scene run. We're not actually seeing this because I have not added our script into our start. Remember, I created a C# script called our game object list, but in our start method we don't have our object list. So I'll just call our object list function, and I'll go ahead and comment out, oh, these are all in caps, our game object list. So we called it our game object list. Correct, that's the one I want. And I'll comment this out so I don't just have my the output containing this first script we created. So just like that, let's go ahead and jump back to Unity, and let's clear our scene and go ahead and run the script. So we can actually see the name is supercube, and this is the position. In fact, let's go ahead and jump to our scene. We can actually see these elements right here. What I also like to do is to just scatter them around so we can actually see it reading their transform. So I'll just shift this guy, shift this game object over here, and shift our sphere, and then our point light. Let's also shift our point light here to change each object's transform. So let's go ahead and clear our scene and then run our scene again. So now that we run our scene, we can actually see this is our supercube right here, and this is the supercube's transform position. It's at 3, 1.0, and 10. If we click our supercube, the X position is at -3.5, the Y position is 1, and the Z position is -10, which is accurate. So we can see our happy sphere is getting the name of our happy sphere and getting the position of our game object, including our point light and also our capsule. So that's how we can create lists and work with lists. Remember, there are a lot of functions that exists with a list. If you have the list name, you can always use the call the list name and then use the dot operator to get the functions you need. For instance, this the name of our list is favorite games. We could just pass in favorite games dot and then check out what each of our functions do. So thank you very much for watching, guys, and I'll see you in the next lesson.